Hello.
¿Estamos todos? ¿O
Your
casi
attention,
todos?
please. Are we all
Yo creo
here?
que sí, ¿no?
Almost all of us.
Bueno, pues ya llegamos
Okay,
a la rectísima final. A ver si es
Just
recta o es curva, ahora
about to
veremos.
finish. Let's see
Antes
if
de
it's a straight
esta
line
última
or
ponencia y
not.
después de las conclusiones finales,
And
a través de la aplicación os queremos lanzar
before this
una
presentation
última
and
pregunta
through the
para que
application, there will
votéis,
be
¿vale?
just
¿Os parece
a
oportuno hacerlo en
last
este momento?
question
Y la
for you to
pregunta es,
vote. The question
con
is the
todo lo que ya
following:
sabíais,
with everything you knew
con todo lo que ya traíais en vuestra cabeza,
before
más lo que
coming
habéis ido
here,
aprendiendo aquí y habéis
plus
ido
what you have
generando
been
entre
learning
todos, y
here
por lo que
and
me vais
generating
contando
among
está siendo
all of you,
mucho. La
as
pregunta
far as I know, is a lot.
¿creéis que
The
podremos
question
ofrecer
is,
un
do you
futuro
believe
mejor
we
a las
can offer
generaciones que vienen?
a better future
¿Sí
for
o no?
future generations?
A través de la aplicación,
Yes
¿vale? Y
or
al final
no?
vemos a ver
Please
lo
use the
que
application
pensamos.
and we will
Y
see
os voy
what
a
you think.
presentar
I'm
a las
going
dos
to
siguientes
introduce you now to the
ponentes.
next
El
panelist.
panel que vamos a escuchar ahora es el futuro de los centros
The
de
topic
arte,
is the future
potenciar la
of art
creatividad
centers
a través de
to
las artes.
promote
Ya en
or
el
foster
punto en el que
creativity
estamos
through
mega
arts.
concretando. Ellas son
They
la
are
doctora Elif,
Dr. Elif
Gokcigdem,
Gokcigdem,
fundadora de una iniciativa
founder
muy
of
interesante
an
que se llama
interesting
Empathy Buildings
initiative.
through the Museums, cuyo
Empathy
objetivo es
meetings
transformar
through the
los museos
museums. The
en
objective is to
plataformas que
transform
inspiren cambios
museums
de comportamiento,
in platforms
actitudes
that will
empáticas
trigger
y una
changes
visión
in
del mundo que tenga
behavior
consideración a
and
toda la humanidad y el planeta.
empathy
Ahí es nada.
and a view of the world that will take into
Os va a
account
contar
the whole
todo
planet.
eso, ¿no?
She will speak
Mucho
about
más
it.
extendido. Y luego tenemos a Karleen Gardner,
And
que
we
es
also
directora
have
del Departamento de
Karleen
Innovación
Gardner,
Educativa
Director of the
del Instituto de
Education
Minneapolis
Innovation
para las
Department
Artes
at the
y del
Minneapolis
Centro para la
Institute
Empatía
for Arts
y las
and the
Artes
Center
Visuales.
for Empathy
Van a
and
analizar diferentes
Visual Arts.
maneras en
They
las que el
will
arte
analyze
puede
different ways
emplearse para
in which
contribuir
art can
que
be
los
used
visitantes respeten
so
y
that
aprecien
visitors
culturas y
respect and
puntos
appreciate
de vista
different
ideas
cultures,
diferentes.
ideas and
Tenéis,
viewpoints.
supongo que ya os habéis acostumbrado a
As you know,
utilizar en la aplicación y a ver todas
you
las
probably
vídeos y
know
los
how to
resúmenes de
use
las
the
conferencias,
apps.
porque aquí solo
You
podemos dar
also have a
tres
chance to
pinceladas,
see the
pero ellas son
summary
mucho
of
más
the
de lo que yo acabo de
conferences.
contar.
But
Así que
of
os
course
dejo
they
con
will
ellas.
introduce
Muchas
much
gracias.
more than the brief introduction I've made.
Thank you for being here, and thank you to the organizers for gathering us here today. So now that we kind of know each other, I would like to invite you on a quick journey before I begin my presentation. So imagine that you live in a city just like this, not this one, but a place just like this. There's this land, there's water, and there's another land. But imagine that there's a bridge that connects the two lands. And then imagine that one morning you wake up and you see tens and thousands of people walking across the bridge towards your side. In protest, they're chanting, they're angry, they're walking towards your side. This is exactly what happened to me in 2013. I woke up one morning in Washington, D.C., checking news in my home country. I'm from Istanbul originally. And there were some protests just broke out. And I saw the picture of these, this bridge full of people, and it's my city. It was so surreal. And I was thinking, what is happening? What's going on? And then I felt so helpless. And I just didn't know what to do. Nothing really mattered. What I knew about life, my professional career, my family is there. And I might have used some colorful language too at the time. But then I thought, what can I do with what I know? I feel so helpless, but this can't be the way. There must be a way out of this. So I decided, let's look inwards and see what I can do as an individual. Not as a, like you have this career, you have this title or educational background, but as a human being, what can I do? So with those thoughts, imagine, expand our perspective to global level. This is what we are facing as a planet. Are you familiar with these symbols? These are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that were introduced in 2015 with the projection that they would all be solved by 2030. And they go from, inequality, injustice, climate, underwater, above water, clean air, partnerships. But what this picture is missing is that it is missing the qualities of the individual, the problem solver, the change maker, us, each one of us. How do we see the world? If we see the world in a fragmented way, we approach it in a different way. But if we see it as a whole, as an interconnected one, then we tend to also harmonize our interactions with the whole, because we are a part of it. So empathy, to me, is at the heart of this pragmatic perspective shift. From a fragmented worldview to a worldview that values the well-being of the others. Empathy gives us triple focus. It allows us to look inwardly, to recognize our own emotions so that we can recognize them in others, and then expand it to people who may not look or think like us around the world, and also the environment, including living and non-living beings. Once we realize this connectedness and get this sense of being a part of something greater than ourselves, we tend to calibrate and harmonize our interactions accordingly. So we are more humble in our engagements with the whole that we are a part of. This is a critical time in our civilization, in our existence, because our knowledge of neurosciences, engineering, artificial intelligence, technologies, art, science, creativity has never been greater. We have a great amount of knowledge, but we have to find a way to turn that knowledge into positive action for greater good. And as I said, empathy is at the heart of this, but then how do we do this? And where do we do this? Who does it? So with those thoughts, I set out to, set out with this question because I thought, what can I do with what I know? Who am I? I don't work at a museum. I work for a corporation. This is my passion. I do this on the side. Okay, I know about, a little bit about museums. I know a little bit about Islamic art history. I'm a mother. I'm a professional. This and that. Let's see what we can do with museums, because I have experienced myself, in my studies over the years, that museums can be transformational. Engaging in authentic objects and experiences and perspective taking can be life transforming. So I looked at, I just fell in love with this question, and I started asking my colleagues and people, has anybody thought about this? What are they doing about this? And then at that point, actually, I met Dr. Ivsevic, and I found out about their pioneering work at the Botin Center. And they kindly contributed a chapter in this book, which enabled me to convince others that this can be a reality. It is not something, a concept that came up to me, out of frustration. And what came out of this was that an overview of the field, at least in the US mostly, with few exceptions like the Botin Center case study, and there was another case study from Germany, that empathy, museums were thinking empathy as a byproduct. That's, everybody was basically taking it for granted, and not as a valuable thing that is essential to our survival. And they have been using it. The more I ask questions, they say, oh yeah, we do that for, it's an institutional value. We sort of take care of our hiring practices, including diverse perspectives. We include, different departments in decision making. We value the voice of the visitor in organizing our exhibitions or drafting our labels. The other one was empathy as an educational tool, but it was sort of like a one-directional tool. It was like, I need to read the mind of my visitor so that I can get them through my doors so I can educate them. So there's still a hierarchy of knowledge, like I know better and I will educate you with the best intentions, but I think it has room for improvement. And then what I was trying to get at was that, empathy is a human phenomenon. It is like light or, any other physics element almost. Why isn't it being, examined in a way that could be, it could be a subject on its own that could be explored in a museum setting. And then it could perhaps also be an intentional outcome of an experience. And when I talk about museums, I'm talking in very general terms. I wanted to say actually informal learning platforms because these concepts can be applicable in libraries, in performing arts centers, even public parks. And one thing I forgot to mention, that when I approached museums, different kinds of museums for this, to get at this outcome, I reached out to children's museums, arts museums, science museums, natural history museums, civil rights, even an animal sanctuary. And then I reached out to people in these institutions at different levels, from curator to exhibition designer to archivist to president and CEO of the place. It was just like a field work of how people are looking at it in general. So through a collaboration, somebody suggested that I should sort of boil this down into executive summary, because apparently the latest thing is that you have to come up with this like 5 easy steps to empathy, or 10 easy steps to accomplish this and that. So what came down to this is that museums hold a mirror to society. They are a safe place to encounter the other. And then they are natural storytellers, but they have an even more important potential to create new narratives that we are missing about our interconnectedness. So it is not just individual creativity, but to what end? What is the end goal of this? What kind of world we want to live in? Experiential learning. There are platforms for experiential learning that we have experienced outside and through the arts experiences over the 3 days. There are places where you can feel awe and wonder due to close proximity, in being close proximity to something authentic. And then there are safe places for contemplation. You can take your time and you can slow down and think. And then, with this result, I got even more curious. Then, I've been learning some terminology here, like regulating our emotions, like naming them. So what makes empathy really? It is not just the clinical term that we see in a dictionary or like a simple Google search. Yes, it is mirror neurons that, we sort of feel like, imagine to feel like another. But we also intuitively know that there are some ingredients that bring this sense of place, which helps foster empathy. But to do that, we have to ask some hard questions, actually. What is the object of your empathy? What are you trying to get your audience? What are you trying to foster empathy towards? Wherever you go around the world, there's always another. To me, where I come from, there's others, our neighbors in the region. In the US, there are others across the border, down south, So there's always an other. But is this the kind of world we live in, we want to live in? That doesn't really fit in the interconnectedness concept, if we believe that that might be an important worldview to keep in mind. And then part 1 looked at how do we perceive the other? So what is the other? How do we define other? And I invited writers from, experts from neuroscience, from behavioral sciences, philosophy, artificial intelligence experts, to learn from them how they perceive the other through our intellect, through our heart. There was a spiritual leader who talked about that, and through artificial, augmented reality, which can be a whole, the topic of a different conversation, because then there are multiple identities come into play. And then through our worldview, these are the filters. Even our understanding of what empathy is, or what compassion can be, or even what love can be, I believe it depends on our worldview, which is mostly shaped from when we are young, and it is influenced by attitudes and behaviors of people around us. Alchemy of Empathy, I will talk in detail in the coming slides, is like, some of the ingredients that make empathy. As I mentioned, we know these intuitively, right? I mean, we empathize with our partners, with our children, with our colleagues. This is inherently there, that it's a survival skill, essentially. So breaking down those ingredients and naming them, I believe we can also regulate them. Just like regulating our emotions, naming and increasing our vocabulary of our understanding of what empathy can be within the context of an interconnected worldview. And then part 3, so all this work, to what end again? What is it used for? It is the scope and the spectrum of empathy. Of course, it has applications from environment to education to innovation to entrepreneurship to better communities. And also, yesterday we talked about artificial intelligence, not just how artificial intelligence will affect our lives, but artificial intelligence is still being designed as we speak. Whose values, whose worldviews this is designed with? What kind of worldview, what kind of ethics do they come with? So I believe that it's essential to have these spaces like museums, art centers, informal learning spaces for us to actively and intentionally explore what this phenomena is. So that as we are doing and as we are learning, there's a fluent exchange between, across industries. So museums can be incubators of innovation in that sense. So these are the ingredients of alchemy of empathy that I was able to, and there's more, but you can only do so much in a book format. And I actually thought about 2 others since I got here, so it is definitely work in progress. This is just an invitation for all of us to think and intentionally look at our experiences in everyday life, in a museum or in other places. What makes empathy? Because all these things, what I learned from the content that came in, all the chapters that came in for the book, is that they are sort of like interbeings. These ingredients are not a bulleted list. They are not like puzzle. They don't have corners and borders. They are fluid, like a water drop. So in vulnerability, you have perhaps proximity or maybe curiosity. In storytelling, you have perhaps awe and wonder and play. So depending on the context, imagine then the combinations that we can create and intentionally look and design for in everywhere, not just in arts centers, but in our daily lives. We can shape our conversations with our friends, our colleagues, so it can have multiple implications. And this is also an invitation to the science community to see if these ingredients are valuable to look in, to see if there's scientific evidence and what might be some of the potentials and the pitfalls of this kind of approach. Because there's no prescription. We just have to figure this out together. So in that sense, a space can be something like this. It could be a virtual space. It could look like a children's museum or a science museum where curiosity, play, humor, social inquiry go hand in hand. It could be an outdoor space, a collective journey, an experience that everybody is sharing the same emotion or same shared goal. Or it could look like this. It could look like a dinner table or a breakfast table or a cup of tea shared between 2 friends. This is an example of a space. So I would like you to keep an open mind and try to figure out what ingredients you would place in this space.
Ya Habiballah Resulü Halik-ı yektatü Bergüzini Zülcelali Pakü bi hemtatü
like to ask you quickly, have you very inspired to associate this space? What does, ideological or religious, connotations or cultural tags, labels, how would you associate this space? Like there's something happening here. Any ingredients that come to mind? Designing movement. I'm sorry? Meditation. Energy. Sharing. Connection. Synchronicity. Freedom. Acts. Rotation. Yeah? So all these things, if we look at them deeper, to me, I was so moved actually with the Calder exhibit and the dance, sculpting the movement exercise, artistic experience. To me, there's no difference between this ritual with what was expressed in the art gallery. It is a yearning towards our expression of our humanness. It's creative expression. So these kinds of, I think, if we boil things down to these ingredients beyond, linear, explanations, we can find perhaps more connections about our shared humanity and what we are all yearning for. And I would like to conclude my presentation with a quote from Rumi. By the way, he just celebrated his 812th birthday, and he's still the best-selling poet in the US, maybe around the world. So I think he might be onto something. He says, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean within a drop." So I think this goes not only to emotions or the ingredients of, the alchemy of empathy, but it is true for each one of us. Yesterday, Giovanni mentioned this Big Bang, as the big creation, right? I believe we all share this yearning to, through the exploration of variety around us, the beauty around us, we all have this yearning for connection, to be one, to be interconnected. And perhaps that's what our truth is, and it might be worth looking into. Thank you.
Buenos dias. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much to the Botín Center for such an inspirational conference. I have a million ideas in my head and 10 research projects I want to do, so thank you for that. Today I'm going to talk about how museums, art centers, how we really need to be innovative, creative. We need to think much more about the impact we can have on our communities, how we need, as institutions, we need to model vulnerability and both practice and foster empathy. So this is an image of my museum. It's 103 years old. And the quote up here is from a famous Smithsonian museum professional, Stephen Weil. And in 2002, he published a book, Making Museums Matter. And his chapter was called From Being About Something to Being for Somebody. And it really, museums like my museum were founded many years ago by elite, wealthy individuals, and they were these treasure troves that were about masterpieces. And Weil is really saying that we need to think about connecting people with those objects and how we can use that connection for the greater good, to engage our communities, to be more relevant and meaningful, not to be these kind of ivory towers on hills, but to be museums and places for everybody that bring people together. And I'll say a great example of that was last night when I was walking outside on the plaza, and there were so many people coming together to experience art, to socialize. And as museums, we really need to think about being community centers and gathering spaces. And one of the reasons we really need to think about changing is the somebody that Stephen Weil was talking about in 2002 is changing. Our world is rapidly changing through immigration. No longer are there times when we live in bubbles where everybody looks like us, shares the same language, the same culture. our world is diversifying, and as museums and art centers, we really need to think about both diversifying internally. Our staffs need to represent the communities we want to engage and serve. And I will say in the United States, the Mellon Foundation did a study a few years ago that showed that all management and executive leaders in art museums are white, 84% of the people. That does not represent our community, and it also doesn't bring any divergent thinking. So we need to change internally, we need to change our staff and our practices, and then we need to think about how we can engage audiences that might not have historically visited art museums and art centers. And we also have to be aware of what's going on in the world around us. We don't live in a vacuum where politics, social issues, human rights issues don't impact all of us. So we really need to be places, safe spaces, like Elif was saying, where people can come together to have really challenging conversations in safe spaces. I believe we can use art to do that. We can also foster creativity and innovation to really solve some of the problems in our world today. And so thinking about empathy, I feel like with everything that's going on in the world today, we've become much more divisive, much more polarized. There's a lack of understanding and compassion in our world. And the word empathy, Einfühlung in German, was coined by an aesthetic philosopher, Robert Vischer, in the late 19th century, and it literally meant to feel into an inanimate object, so a person feeling into a work of art. And years later, another philosopher, Theodor Lipps, kind of modified the theory, and he said that an artwork is never complete until someone experiences it. So it's that kind of connection between a person and an art where that understanding, the human understanding and connection happens. And so really empathy was born in the visual arts. So it seems very appropriate for an art museum to focus on empathy. And I love this quote by an author, Susan Vreeland: "When there is no imagination of others' lives, there is no human connection, and therefore no compassion. Without compassion, then community, commitment, loving kindness, human understanding, peace, all shrivel. Individuals become isolated, the isolated can turn cruel, and the tragic hovers. Art and literature are antidotes to this." And I couldn't agree more with that. I feel that art can be this magic kind of secret sauce that can bring people together, open up our imaginations, open up our minds, open up our hearts, connect us with one another, and really help us think about multiple possibilities. And I also love that there's a professor at Stanford who does empathy research named Jamil Zaki, and he says that art is like an empathy boot camp, that you can try things out in safe spaces, and it really makes you stretch your empathy muscles and exercise them. So with that in mind, in 2017, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, or MIA as we're called, received generous funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and some of our supporters to establish our museum as a center for empathy in the visual arts. And it's not a separate center. It is our museum. We're this lab. We're doing research. We're experimenting. We're trying new things. And it's just not about our visitors. We're really thinking about empathy as an institutional value. Much as Elif said, we've added a whole part to our strategic plan, and we're thinking about how, as a staff, we can gain more empathy for one another, have a better understanding so that we can collaborate and work better together. And then we're also thinking very much about our visitors. How can we intentionally create experiences using our incredible collections? We have 90,000 objects representing 5,000 years across the globe. So we have endless possibilities of using art to engage our visitors, connect them, and foster empathy. And so we know we cannot continue doing what we have been doing for so many years. We can't keep the status quo up. We can't have the lone genius in their office creating a product and then just presenting it. We need to collaborate. And this is what we think this should be this. And these are two examples of when we founded the Center for Empathy in the Visual Arts. We are partnering with the University of California, Berkeley, their Greater Good Science Center, and Berkeley Social Interaction Lab. We convened a group of thought leaders at Berkeley. These are scientists, neuroscientists, researchers, academics, artists, museum professionals. And a couple years later, last March, we hosted our first empathy lab at the museum. And again, it was people from all different disciplines, people with different expertise, people that think differently. And we came together and we had some problem solving we wanted help with, like we're thinking about this exhibition, how could we bring an empathy lens to it? What are some ways we could teach in the galleries to foster empathy? So really just this whole brain trust of people came, and the ideas were, numerous. I can't even tell you how many ideas we've come up with, and it's really impacted our staff. So we really believe that we've got to think outside of our museum, bring different minds and experiences together to really move museums forward and to truly engage our communities and have impact. And so we need to be thinking about, for our communities, they're changing, and we need to be welcoming institutions. You saw the picture of my museum, white columns, marble. Can be pretty intimidating to some people that maybe didn't grow up going to an art museum. So how can we create a more friendly, welcoming environment? This is just a step. We know that we have a lot of immigrant populations in Minneapolis. So we did a campaign in different languages. So we wanted to represent the languages that are in our communities. So we these were on bus shelters, buses, billboards, and they're outside our museum. We did them in Somali, Hmong, Spanish, Ojibwe, and Dakota, which are native languages in the Minnesota area, and then of course English. And this is just a step. This is by no means going to bring in droves of people that have never visited an art museum, but it's just a signal to say, you're welcome here. Please come. This is a place for you. And we also heard from our visitors and our staff, since we really are diversifying our staff, diversifying our visitorship, that we need to think about things people might need. And we kept hearing that we needed a prayer room. And so last spring, we modified one of our spaces, worked with someone from the community that really helped us in knowing what to do and how we could organize the prayer room. And so now we have this space for anybody that wants to use it. So really trying to put ourselves in our visitors' shoes, make them comfortable, feel welcome at our museum. And then we also know that we can't, again, sit in that office by ourselves and make assumptions about people in our communities. So we have a real focus now on community advisory committees. If we're doing an exhibition, we need to talk to people that represent that culture or that community and get their perspectives, and then actually do something with it, not just do it and check a box, but to authentically engage people and really deliver on what we say that we're going to do. And then we're also doing listening sessions. We're going out to communities where people are, not expecting them to come to the museum. Oftentimes these are people that have never visited our museum, and really listening to them and getting their ideas and their feedback. And then we do a lot of focus groups too. So we're doing a lot of active listening and then really putting that into practice. Again, all those diverse perspectives that can help us be a better, more engaging institution. And as I mentioned earlier, we're working with the University of California, Berkeley on a research project. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of scientific research that shows that the visual arts foster empathy. And I know in my heart and my gut that it happens. It does, but there's no data to show that. So that's kind of what inspired this research project. And we're doing a study on facilitated experience, gallery tours. So these are from tours for 9 to 13-year-old students. And we give really good tours at the museum, but how could we be more intentional about these tours fostering empathy? So again, creating a space, sitting down with the students or the adults, talking about kind of the ground rules or the ground rules, or what do you want to see? How can we make this a safe space? How can we create a place where people can be vulnerable and share personal things about themselves? We did the emotion check-in, like Zorana said. We'd never done that before, just checking in to see how people are feeling. They can point to an emoji, they can use a pipe cleaner to make the feeling, or they can just share that with us. And then we're thinking a lot in the tours themselves about emotion recognition, body language, so identifying those in artworks. And then also very much thinking about perspective taking. And this is something we love, Harvard Project Zero's global thinking routines. And this is one that we use a lot. And it's really challenges people to identify someone in an artwork and really try to think about their perspective. What do they know? What are they feeling? What are they thinking? And then kind of stepping back and saying, okay, you can't take things just at face value. If you really want to foster empathy, you've got to dig deeper. And so what more might you need to know or learn about that person so you could have greater understanding? And then stepping back and really thinking about how hard it is to take on someone else's perspective. We can't ever completely take someone else's perspective, but we can really try to understand things from their point of view. You don't have to necessarily agree, but you can have better understanding. And ultimately, we hope all these experiences in the museum will lead to action in the way people view and act in the world. We're also thinking in our public programs, how can we bring different perspectives and viewpoints? This was a project we did with the Advocates for Human Rights, and we worked with 3 spoken word artists that are from our community who are all refugees to Minneapolis. We asked them to go to our galleries, find a piece of artwork that inspired them, and then to create a piece of artwork. And so you can see them each performing in the galleries with the objects they selected. And each of the objects they picked were from their countries of origin and really helped them tell their migration experience. And then we had a group discussion afterwards with the audience. So really humanizing art, hearing those personal stories, like that ingredient, storytelling, that human connection, really trying to build bridges between people that some people might see as other. We're also, through art making, there's a lot of research that's been done about senior citizens, and many of them live alone. They're socially isolated, they're depressed. A lot of them are retired, and they're really wanting something that inspires them. They want to learn a new skill. So we have developed a series of workshops and programs for senior citizens at the museum. You can see this is a portrait making one. We've done a graffiti street art program. We've done music, we've done writing, but really trying to empathize, put ourselves in people's shoes, and think about how we can meet their needs. And then, of course, we're thinking about youth. And this is a project we did a couple of years ago called Girls Design the World, and it was with the National Museums of Kenya. And so it was a global exchange program between young women in Minneapolis and young women in Nairobi. And they used the design thinking process, which is very focused on empathy, putting yourself in someone's shoes, seeing things from their perspective, thinking of multiple possibilities. In this case, they were thinking of solutions for environmental problems, challenges in their communities. So they talked with people who were experiencing those challenges, decided what problem they were trying to solve, came up with a bunch of different ideas, finally decided on an idea. They prototyped these ideas, and we created exhibitions in each country of the prototypes, and then the girls traveled to each country. And really thinking about global understanding, they realized that they weren't so different after all. And they also realized that the environmental challenges in their communities weren't that different. Maybe they were different on scale, but they weren't that different. And then it also really gave them self-confidence. One of the young women said, "I found a leader inside myself that I didn't know existed." So really powerful program. This is another one. We're actually recruiting youth for this right now. This is a partnership with a school in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And this is using art as a catalyst to connect youth. It's really thinking about using art as a form of self-expression, identity building, and then using that to bring youth together to think about global issues and human rights issues. And then in exhibitions, we're also bringing the empathy lens to exhibitions. I will say that we don't have the lone curator who comes up with the idea and that happens. We have a very collaborative process within our museum, but we also know we need more perspectives than that. This is an example. We have a series of several period rooms, like historic period rooms from all over the world in our museum. So you can see this is the former installation, decorative arts, and we did a study, and most people looked at the objects, connected with the objects, but people used to live in these spaces, and people didn't really feel a human connection. So we launched an initiative called Living Rooms to really bring humanity, activate these spaces, and to tell stories that might not have been told in the past. And so for this space, you can see it's from Charleston Dining Room. It's from Charleston, South Carolina, from a plantation where enslaved Africans worked. So they worked in the fields. I'm sure they served food in this dining room. So we felt it was very important to elevate that story. So we engaged with members of our community from the African diaspora, African Americans, and we said, what would you want to see in this space? And they said, you definitely have to address the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. And you also need to celebrate the contributions of the African diaspora. So that's what we did. So we have historic objects paired with contemporary objects. If you can see the portrait video on the right, that is a Senegalese chef named Pierre Thiam, who is world-renowned. We brought him to the museum, did a program with him. So breaking bread, another one of those alchemy of empathy ingredients. It was amazing. We brought people from all different cultures together, and Chef Pierre Thiam and one of our local chefs created a meal. And just the connections over food and that cultural understanding, it was just a magic event, and we're hoping to do more like that. And then also in the front, you can see these baskets. These are sweetgrass baskets. They were made by enslaved Africans for rice cultivation. And we have historic baskets, and then we also have contemporary baskets by an amazing artist named Henrietta Snipes, who we invited in to the museum to tell her story, and then to also do a basket making workshop. This is another exhibition that we did about a year and a half ago called Art and Healing. This young man right here is named Philando Castile. You might have heard of him. He was fatally shot by a police officer in a routine traffic stop in St. Paul, which is a city right next to Minneapolis, and because his taillight on his car was out. So this is his mother, Valerie. She contacted the museum, and she said after Philando's death, people from all over the world sent art to her. They used art to heal, to cope, to express their grief and anger. And she really wanted to highlight the artists, but she also really wanted to foster empathy. She said, I want people to understand what it's like to be a Black person in America today. So we really took that to heart and brought in a community advisory committee because we didn't feel like at the museum that we had the lived experiences that we needed. So we really wanted ideas for the exhibition, for our programs. We worked with a trauma therapist who said, you need to create a space where people can go. If they're going to be re-traumatized, they need a quiet space. He helped us. We had healing ushers who could help if they saw people and experiencing trauma, that they could lead them to that space. And then we also created within the exhibition opportunities for people to reflect and respond. These are Post-it notes over here. I think we had over 1,700 Post-it notes, and our evaluation person has kind of come up with a lot of different themes for that. These are just some of the responses we got. When will people finally figure it out? We are all humans. Respect for all people. Teach my son to see the person, not the color. Grow my understanding, empathize, and act. So this was a really powerful exhibition for our community and really transformative for our museum. We have an exhibition up right now about the Vietnam-American War. We have a reflection room for that. We do staff trainings to try to prepare people to kind of understand the historical trauma that many of these people have experienced, and that how we can be a more empathetic museum. And then finally, This is an exhibition we hosted last summer, Hearts of Our People, Native Women Artists. And it was really new scholarship. There had never been a show done on Native women artists. But what's different about this, you can see the round table was in 2015. So for 4 years, our curators co-collaborated with the artists in the exhibition. So we had a local advisory committee, a national advisory committee, and we had an idea, but it completely changed and was co-created by working with these amazing women and scholars. We also really wanted empathy to be a focus in the exhibition, so we sent our video team out to go to the artist studios all over the country and in Canada, so we could hear from these women from their own voices through our audio tour and for videos in the exhibition. We also translated labels into 26 native languages. So I really think that this is an empathic way to curate exhibitions, to interpret exhibitions, and I hope it's a way that we're going to continue moving forward, really changing the way we think about museums, changing our practice. This is a work in progress. I don't think this work is ever done, but as museums and art centers, we really need to think about how we change internally, how we can engage more audiences and perspectives to truly foster empathy and compassion, and to be real places where people can come to grapple with issues and to connect with one another. Thank you.
Muy bien, pues vamos con preguntas.
Okay, we have some questions.
Vamos allá. Comentaba
You
que
said that
los
museums could
pueden
be
ser
incubators of
innovación.
innovation.
¿Puede darnos
Can you give
algunos
some
ejemplos de
examples or
museos
illustrations of
en el mundo
museums
que considere innovadores
that
y
you
las
think
prácticas
are
concretas?
innovative, and can you speak about specific examples?
Was that for, oh, I thought that was for you. So besides my museum, no, I'm kidding. I would say, I would say the Botín Center is pretty amazingly innovative, so I'm going to say that. I'll say in the U.S., the Exploratorium, that's in San Francisco, it's a science museum, but they also have a social sciences exhibition, and it really is about connecting people through these activities, through conversations.
Yeah, they are actually, they were also another inspiration for my work, because I did have an experience in one of their exhibits which helped me face my own biases in a safe space, and it was sort of like an out-of-body experience in a way. It's, those things can lead to a pragmatic perspective shift, and it is, once it happens, it is really hard to see the world as you were seeing it before. And Exploratorium is also, they were the ones who coined the term hands-on exhibits, which is now a big trend and all over the world, especially in children's museums, science museums. But what they are working on right now is called social inquiry exhibits, which are similar to what we have experienced outside with the movie experience, the toys, collaborative toys, games. Putting social psychology, behavioral sciences, neurosciences behind, and also sort of evaluating the impact and the outcomes of the experiences.
Mm-hmm. Okay. ¿Cómo puede aumentar la
How
empatía en un
can
museo?
empathy
Algunos ejemplos, por favor.
be increased with a museum? Some examples? How can we increase
¿Cómo
empathy
puede-
in a museum? Did you hear it? Okay, I say it again. How can empathy be promoted or fostered in a museum? Can you provide some examples?
I think we can, empathy can be fostered through museums, through facilitated experiences like some of the tours I showed. We're actually going to do pre and post. We're developing an empathy quiz with the University of California, Berkeley, and it will be the first non-self-reporting empathy test. So it's on an iPad, it's about emotion identification, body language, and then there's a lot of perspective taking in it. So I think that we can use are collections, art objects, as well as a dialogue-based teaching practice to engage people not only like empathizing with the artist, empathizing with the subject of the artwork, but then empathizing with each other because it's a social experience. So I think we can do that. And then I think we can also, like some of the exhibitions that I talked about, really think about intentionally integrating empathy into the way we curate, design, and interpret the exhibitions.
And also, I think, a really critical, essential component of that, fostering empathy is getting to know your own emotions. By looking inward and recognizing your own emotions and being able to, articulate them, because that's how you recognize it in others, in, people around you, or through an artwork, through an object. So that's, I think, it's a two-way sort of dynamic.
Perfecto. El arte es el ingrediente
Is art
contra la
the
crueldad
ingredient
en el mundo.
against the world's cruelty?
¿Cómo puede
How
ilustrar
can art
el arte
fight
contra esto?
against cruelty?
It's a big question. Well, I mean, I'll say, I think art is an expression of what it is to be human. So I think art can connect us on levels that other experiences can't. It's so emotional. Again, it's you make your own personal connections with it, so you learn about yourself. But if you're engaging with a group, you're learning about them too. So I think it's just like breaking down those barriers, saying, and getting greater understanding. Like I said earlier, you don't necessarily have to agree with the person, but it's just at least understanding where they're coming from is a huge step, I think, in kind of breaking down all that.
And I think, this tension between, beauty and cruelty has always been through our existence. It is nothing new.
Right.
So we have this, saying, and I think it may be a Native American philosophy that, or a story that each one of us have two wolves in our heart, and they always fight with each other for food. So whichever which one you feed the most wins. So this is a never-ending challenge.
Yes. Elif, mencionaste que la empatía es
Elif,
una
you said
herramienta
that empathy is a
social
social tool
de supervivencia,
for survival.
sobrevivencia.
Can you speak
¿Podrías
a little
comentar un
bit
poco más
more
en
about
profundidad
this,
esa
about the
convicción?
empathy as a survival tool?
I think there are more qualified people to speak about that in this room, but to my knowledge, empathy is a almost like instinctive emotion that starts with birth. The mother's communication with baby without any words happens through empathy. And then that's how a baby learns how to communicate. It's a survival skill. If she cannot or he cannot read the emotions of the mother or express herself, there's death at the end. And also empathy is an instinct. It is also could be used for hunting instinct. Thinking like an animal to see, what an animal might do next, so that you are there to sort of put food on your table. And the same idea applies to business intuition. Always thinking about evaluating and using your intuition and empathy and reading the everything around you in a way so that you are always a step ahead of the competition with new ideas.
Okay. Bueno, is in English, ¿verdad? La última está en inglés.
Bueno, está en inglés.
Well, I believe vulnerability is essential. Empathy cannot be learned from instructions. No matter how many, bulleted lists you have or diagrams you have, at the end of the day, it's an experience you have to feel. And for anyone to even consider putting themselves through that, because at the end, it's sort of unknown, right? You don't know what's going to happen to you. It requires vulnerability. And not everybody might be open to that. But if we expand this ecosystem of empathy building, not just in art institutions, but through science, through engineering, through libraries. It has the potential of becoming the norm rather than something that is soft and it's good to have all those people, they have all these ideas, but it becomes an expectation, it becomes the norm. So it is essential for us to create those spaces, safe spaces where people can feel vulnerability and be willing to get the rug pulled under their feet for a moment so that they can quickly sort of recalibrate their thoughts and their paradigms, their worldview according to what is really essential for our survival.
Yeah, and I would add, I think I agree, and being vulnerable is admitting you don't know everything and being open to ideas from other people. So I see vulnerability as a strength, that you're confident enough to know that you don't know, and that you really are open to other ideas that can really benefit you and others.
Okay. Y la última, yo creo que será,
And the last
una
question,
persona con falta de
a
empatía
person that is
puede
not
ser creativa,
empathic, can they be creative?
podría trabajar
Can they
en un
work
museo
in
de
a
arte.
museum, in an art museum, a non-empathetic person?
Yeah, I mean, all kinds of people in all kinds of environments. But I think empathy is, one thing good about empathy is it is contagious. So if we create the right environment and right culture, there's a chance that those people might be influenced to, again, calibrate their interactions with the rest of the group. So there's a way, again, the two wolves, right? Which one do you feed the most? If most of us are empathetic and caring and kind and compassionate, I mean, I believe scientifically it is proven that it is contagious. And this happens even without any words, as simple as like if I start yawning now, you might also start yawning. Or if I start giggling, you might start giggling. So that's a very basic level of empathy. But from then on, how can we build on that instinct or inherent emotion to encapsulate the entire universe?
Yeah, and I think, too, we're thinking about everybody at our museum is like, oh, we work at an art museum. Of course we're empathic. And it is a skill that can be grown like a muscle that can be exercised, and we can become more empathic. So we're really thinking about how we can create experiences for our visitors, but also for our staff. Like the empathy tours, our staff are going on those. So we're using our collection to give people opportunities to be vulnerable and to really strengthen their empathy muscles.
Sentirse vulnerables y desarrollar el uso de la empatía.